Welcome to Project Command. I'm Captain Peter Eunice, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Lieutenant Duke Cunyo. Hey Duke, how you doing?
Great, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, glad you could be here. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to get projects started. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, it really helps us if you like, subscribe, or share this episode or any episode that you found valuable with a friend or coworker who you think might appreciate it. Here at Project Command, we're committed to helping fire departments deliver better projects. We don't charge for any of our content. We're giving it all away to help the fire service get better together. And also, if you've got a question or a topic you'd like to hear us cover, send us an email at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it either by email or in a future episode. Now let's get to the podcast. Okay, so to get started, let's talk about where do projects come from. So generally speaking, there are three ways that a project can come to you or get started. The first is leadership driven. Now, it's my experience that this tends to be where a lot of projects come from. And what I mean by leadership driven is somebody on your executive leadership team or your chief or your boss or whatever will come to you and they'll say, hey, this is something that I want you to get done. Whether it's, hey, I want you to roll Bluetooth out to the whole fire department, or I want you to replace the 12 lead cardiac monitors. That's actually a project that Duke's working on right now. So yeah, leadership driven basically just means that the project came to you from above, whether that's your leadership team or your boss. The next is what we can call a team driven project, which is somebody comes to you, that could be somebody that's on your team or somebody that's on a different team comes to you and they say, hey, either I've recognized a problem and I this is a project I think we could do to solve it, or I see an opportunity out there that I want to capitalize on, and so let's design a project around that. So the project comes to you from somebody on your team. And the last one is a self-initiated project. That's one where you see the value in something or you see a problem that you want to fix and you have an idea for a project that you want to get started. And so I think it's just important to know where these projects can come from. And then I think most people that are listening to this probably have a sense in their department where the majority of the projects are coming from. It's been, like I said, it's been my experience, they typically come from the more leadership driven direction. What do you think about that, Duke?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously when we're talking about the fire service, we have, command-driven, top-down organizations. And so the folks that are making decisions at that executive level are going to generally be the folks that are driving these projects.
Yeah, makes sense.
But at the same time, I think it's really important to realize, we've all sat around a fire department kitchen table, right? And there's plenty of ideas that come out of that world.
Too many ideas.
Yeah, maybe a few too many, right? But some of these projects that are really well done and produce great results do come from that first. And
yeah, that's right.
Maybe somebody at your executive level pushes it down from there, but it might actually start in that team-driven level first.
Yeah, it's true. There's definitely no shortage of good ideas at the firehouse table. That's a fact. Okay, great. Well, let's get into the first step of how you get projects started. And so what I want to talk about here is the charter document. So a charter document it's great for a couple of reasons. And so the first thing I want to kind of delve into about the charter is what it looks like, what should be on it, and what is its purpose. And so I think a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this, people kind of conflate the charter with the scope, and I do get that because they're similar. And so I like to think about the charter document like it's almost like a pre-scope. And you don't always need one. You typically need that charter if you want to either make sure that you're in alignment with your boss or your leadership team, or if you've gotten a project that you either started or that was team driven and you need to get approval on it, like you want to present it to your leadership team and say, hey, this is a project we want to do. And so with that in mind, your scopes, or your charter rather, is going to have things like high level objectives, a basic timeline like 12 months, 16 months, 4 months, whatever. It's going to have what's called the business case, which is essentially you make the case for why your organization needs this. What's the the advantage or the benefits that your organization is going to see from this project?
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. In project management and how it runs in the fire department, I don't think anything fits perfectly into neat little boxes. And so, I really find that most project management concepts are tools for us to use as firefighters and as, fire administrators to get things done. And this is one of the only times that I would say in my experience that this is a have-to item. You have to have a project charter. It's so powerful. The first time that I started working on a project after I learned what a project charter was, it was as if it opened up this entire world to me that, oh, this is how you get things done. Because if you don't have the charter, you don't have the scope under control, you don't have the schedule under control, you don't have the costs under control. And without those, you're in trouble. And moreover, without that authorization from an executive sponsor, you could be dead in the water in a heartbeat. So yeah, have to have a project charter.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, that's a good tie-in for another thing I wanted to talk about with the charter. So, I've seen this and I've talked to people in other organizations, and I think that this is a pretty common problem. And that is, especially, by the way, especially in larger organizations, you can have unauthorized projects. And the risk of an unauthorized project, and by unauthorized project, what I mean is like, somebody out in the field maybe has a good idea and they reach out to IT and they say, hey, can you help me design a new map layer for our mapping system, or, something like that. And now, without verifying that this project is in line with the organization's goals or is something that we can support right now you have an unauthorized project that's siphoning resources, whether that's IT hours or maybe even dollars or overtime or whatever. And so the charter is a really simple fix for that, because if you can institute it in your organization and it's just like a common practice that you need a charter for a project, it's so easy to determine if a project is authorized, because your IT people can then just say, hey, do you have a signed charter? And the answer is just yes or no. And it gives you a lot of control in your organization, because you can say, hey, listen, a charter is only approved if it's been signed by these 6 people or these 10 people or however many you want it to be. But it basically allows you to control when projects get started so that you don't have kind of runaway projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for your larger organizations, your bigger fire departments. I think that's really important to have that mechanism there, just to kind of keep an eye on things and make sure that, like you said, you don't have runaway projects or things happening that you might not necessarily authorize.
Yeah. If one thing that I think we can all recognize about firefighters, we tend to be self-starters. We take the initiative, and that's great on the fire scene, and it can be good on projects, but you really don't want to have unauthorized projects siphoning off those resources, because, especially in local government, resources are finite, and so when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So it's just important that resources go to authorized projects. So we talked a little bit about the charter, kind of how we use it as a pre-scope, or how organizations can use it as a way to verify that projects are authorized before they start taking those departmental or organizational resources. Now let's move into the scope. Now, I get a lot of questions about scopes, and I think people can make this more complicated than it needs to be. And when you see a scope document, it can be these really elaborate documents, and I think maybe in the private sector that makes a lot of sense. I think I've found that in the fire service, this isn't a surprise to nobody, you really got to keep things simple. So the scopes that I tend to make are just 2 columns. It's what's in scope and what's out of scope. But I think when we talk about scopes, though, it does need to be, you want a good tight scope, like a well-organized, well-thought-out scope. And so the best way that you can build that comprehensive, thorough scope is you really need to collect requirements. And so I gave an example on our last podcast that I really like. And so I'll just briefly give it to you again right here. If, let's say, Duke hired me to build a shed in his backyard, and he said, hey, all right, here's the shed, or I want you to build me a shed. It's got to cost less than $5,000, and you need to build it in less than 3 months. Would it be okay if I just go build any shed I want? No. Because Duke probably had specifics in his mind, like maybe he wanted it to have electrical wiring or a dog door or whatever. And that's where the requirements collection process comes in, like really getting in there and saying, okay, what do you want this shed to have? It needs to have electricity, it needs to have this, it needs to have that. Those are the requirements that we're collecting for the scope.
Yeah, absolutely. And to get the requirements, what do you have to have? You have to know who your stakeholders are, right? And so to use a
Exactly.
little bit of that PMI project management language, this is one of those things. Your stakeholders are important. And the reality is that I've learned just in a few years of doing project management in a more formal way is that there are more of them than you think.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
man, that's true.
so when you get into something, it's really important that you ask a lot of questions from your project sponsor, somebody that probably has a little more experience in this particular topic, whatever it is, to make sure that you are covering all your bases, getting all of your stakeholders covered, because then and only then are you going to actually meet the requirements that are needed for the project.
Yeah, that's really well said. That because the next question is like, okay, so you get all, you need to get all your requirements. Where do those requirements live? And Duke's exactly right. They live in people's heads, and the people whose heads they live in are your stakeholders. So, you really want to get, and to go back to my shed analogy, you really want to like dig in. What do you need this shed to have? And so once you get those requirements collected, then you can build a good comprehensive scope. And so just want to really quickly talk about, because I think this is a part that people also have a lot of questions about, what's the best way to collect those requirements? And there's two main ways that I've found work really well in the fire department. And you can do both or either or, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of the pros and cons, but the first is you have a big meeting with all your stakeholders, your project team, and you get together and you just say, okay guys, this is the project, what are the requirements? If we were to jump into a time machine and go to the end of this project and we look back on it, what individual requirements would have had to be met for us to say that was a successful project? Okay, so that's the big meeting approach. Now, obviously the pros are you get everybody in a room, you can brainstorm together. The cons are, if your fire department's anything like ours, it can be tough to get everybody in a room together. People have a lot going on. And then so maybe they come to the meeting, maybe some people are prepared, maybe they're not. And so it's a very sort of resource intensive way to collect those requirements. Actually, Duke, you just did a big meeting for your cardiac monitor replacement project, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're planning that sort of kickoff meeting, it is difficult to arrange the schedules, particularly in the fire department, right? Because the bulk of our employees are built on that sort of 24-hour schedule. And so having everybody from different shifts be able to get together, plus your admin folks all in the same room can be really difficult. The other thing is there's a lot of pressure with that.
Yeah, that's true.
Standing up in front of the room with a project that's just getting started that you don't know everything about, you don't know what your stakeholders have in their brains, you don't know what questions might pop out or objections or whatever it is. There's a lot, and so you have to be ready for that when you take that particular strategy.
Yeah, man, that's right. So let's talk about the other strategy to collect those requirements, and that is kind of my preferred option, which is the shared document. So we use Microsoft Office Suite, so I'll talk about how this looks on a Microsoft Word document. But what I like to do is just set up a basic table, and it'll have a handful of columns, and it'll be something like requirement name, requirement description, added by, date added, and I know this last one can be a little bit subjective, but importance. And so you can put low, medium, high, critical. And so when you do that, and so you put this table together, and I'll throw a few of those requirements in to kind of put an example on there for people to use. So the requirement might be, to go back to the shed analogy, electricity would be the name of the requirement, the description, shed must have, be wired with electricity. Added by Peter Eunice, date added, October 21st, importance critical. Maybe I really need that thing to have electricity. And so you can do both. To be clear, you can do both. You can have that big meeting, and then you can say, okay, listen, I know that you need some time to think about this, so I'll be sending out a shared document to everybody. Please, as you think of these requirements, go in and add them, and then we'll review them after 2 weeks. And like anything else with projects, you really want to assign a deadline. And something I said on the last podcast, and I'll repeat it because I think it's important, is Parkinson's Law, which states work will expand to fit the time that you give it. So if you say, hey guys, I need this done in a week, it'll get done in a week. If you don't assign a time, it could take a lot longer. So you really want to put a deadline on something. So, I like to generally give people a week or two. So get that shared document out, give them a week or two to figure it out, get those requirements in there. And then once you have all those, the analogy I like to use is those requirements, each one is like a brick. And when you get enough of those bricks, you can use it to build your scope.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I love about utilizing the shared document concept is again, what tends to happen on these projects? Oh, you found another stakeholder that you didn't think about, or you know, somebody else needs to be added in, and boom, it's easy to add that person in. So to continue on with our shed analogy, let's say, oh man, Peter, you know what I forgot? I forgot that my HOA actually needs to be in on this thing because they have a list of things that they have to have done. So boom, you can pop the HOA into that stakeholder list, add them to the document, and let them kind of go to work.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Because, like, just like Duke is saying, if you get that meeting going and or you go through all the trouble of getting all these people to the meeting, and then a week later you just go, oh man, like I forgot this person really needed to be involved. That shared document is just a great way to make sure you capture everybody, or capture everybody's opinion on that.
Yeah, and obviously we know in the fire department, nobody will ever be shy to tell you what you forgot about.
That's a fact. That's a fact. Okay, great. So we've talked about collecting requirements and how you use those requirements to build your scope. Now let's talk about the next step. What do you do with the scope document? So you've gotten all your requirements, you've made a list of all the things based off of your requirements, what is in scope, and then you take that to your project sponsor and you discuss what is out of scope. Now typically what's out of scope is going to be things that are similar or kind of related but not involved in the project. And this is as good a time as any to put a little cautionary note in here. People, when they see a project going, it has momentum, it has energy, it has a budget, it has a team, it has a project manager, and you're cooking. And people see that and they want to get their stuff done as a part of your project. And so, you'll hear, hey, while you're doing that, can you also do this? So that's where you want to outline what's out of scope. So importantly, what are we going to do and what are we not going to do? And in that part, that what are we not going to do is sometimes more important. You would be so surprised at the amount of stuff that can get packed into a project. And when you expand that scope and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, at least your budget and your timeline are going to get bigger, and maybe the project will just fail altogether. So you really need to protect that scope. Okay, great. So I feel like we've covered the scope pretty well. Let's talk about what you do with that scope. So the next step with a scope is you want to break that scope down into what's called, in project management world, an activities list, which is a fancy way of saying a to-do list. And so, you have all these different things that are in scope. Now you want to break those down into activities. So, and you don't want to just like word for word pull the requirement and make it an activity. You want it to be a bite-sized activity, like something that you could actually write on a to-do list. Like if part of the requirement is this project must be adequately communicated to the operations section. They need to, we need to train on this. Training is not something you can just take training and put it on the activities list. You would need to say, develop training plan. That would be one activity. Communicate training expectations to division would be another activity. Create training video and send out via Target Solutions would be another one. So you can see that the requirement might say training, but you might break training down into 4 different activities. Create a video, come up with a training schedule, etc. And so you want these activities to be bite-sized, something that you could say, hey Duke, I need you to go make the training video, something that you can hand to somebody else to get done. Okay, so think about that like a really long to-do list. Okay, and if you were to do all the things on that to-do list, your project would be done.
Yeah, and what you're describing in PMI terms is what they often would refer to as a work breakdown structure, right?
Yeah.
So those of you that have explored the project management professional world or PMI world and are either going through that or maybe already have, you'll be familiar with the work breakdown structure. And our mutual friend, Scott from All In Prep, told me once that one of the number one things that he asks somebody about when they talk to him about a problem with the project is, do you have a work breakdown structure? And he said, basically that 100% of the time, if they're having a real problem with their project, the answer to that question is no, they haven't. And so if we have this detailed activities list or work breakdown structure, however we want to call it, that's going to be maybe your top predictor of the project's success.
Yeah, right on. That's right on. And it also is a really critical step because a lot of times the schedule or the timeline of a project can be really difficult to figure out. Usually the deadline, it'll be, hey, you need to get this done by December 31st or whatever. And you'll know the start because the start is when you get the project. But filling in everything between when it starts and when it ends can be tough. So once you have your activities list or your great big giant to-do list, now you can just kind of look at it and say, okay, let's sequence this. What needs to come first? Which activities are we going to do first? Which activities are going to go in the middle? Which activities are going to go in at the end? And what you can also do here, now that you've got all these activities kind of listed out in front of you, is you can start identifying what are called dependencies. So dependencies, the sort of firefighter definition of that is we can't do this thing until this thing is done. So, use a different analogy. If we were going to paint a room in your house, one of the activities might be buy paint, do prep work, put the tape down, do second coat, whatever. We would sequence that. We would say, okay, prep work has to be first, then the tape, then the first coat, then the second coat. But a dependency would be you can't do the second coat until the first coat has dried. Okay, so that's an example of a dependency. And so when you list these activities out like that, number one, you can see kind of the sequence that they need to go in, but this is also where you can start to identify the dependencies. And one more thing I want to say about that, this is also where you get the lead and the lag, which is, and Duke knows, I talk about this all the time. This is probably one of my favorite topics in project management because it's all about momentum. So a good example of my painting analogy is if you do the first coat and you know it's going to take 4 hours for it to dry, that 4 hours is your lag time. That the amount of time there's it's a naturally occurring pause or break in the work. So this is a great opportunity to identify the dependencies and your lead and lag time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that lead and lag concept is so important because, again, if we're extending another analogy out about the painting, while you're waiting for that paint to dry, what can you do, right? Those are your opportunities. And that allows you to keep the momentum going on your project. And you'll hear Peter and I talk about it time and time and time again. You have to keep momentum, y'all. You have to.
Yeah, momentum is critical. And lead and lag are really important for momentum. You don't want these giant breaks in the work where it's like, okay, great, the paint's drying, everybody just sit on your hands for 4 hours. No, maybe you can start, cleaning up, or you can go buy whatever supplies you need or whatever, but look for ways that you can make use of that time, that naturally occurring pause in the project sequence. Okay, so let's do a quick little recap here. So we collected our requirements, we turned those requirements into a scope, we broke that scope down into an activities list or a to-do list. We sequenced that to-do list. Then, after we sequenced it, we identified our dependencies and our lead and our lag. Now, what do we have when we've done all this? We have a schedule. Okay, you can look at this and you can say, okay, this is the order of the work. This is when the project starts. This is when it ends. These are the sequence of activities that we're going to do in this project. These are the things that depend on each other. And these are the naturally occurring breaks in our project sequence. So now we have a project schedule. So let's talk about how we take that and we turn it into our budget, or as they call it in project management world, our cost baseline. So we're going to now look at our schedule and look at all these different activities, and we're going to start estimating based off of these activities how much is each one going to cost. So we can go activity by activity, and I know this can be a little time consuming, but this is what it takes to run a project the right way. And it's one of those things where you put a little bit of work in on the front end, and this is going to save you a lot of work on the back end. And this is how if you want to deliver a project on or under budget, you have to have a budget. So this is how you do this. Okay, so you look at the activities, each one, and you say, let's go to our training one. I say, okay, Duke, I need you to make a training video and I need you to come up with a training plan. Let's estimate the cost on that. So how much is that going to cost? Do we have to purchase anything? No, we have all the stuff we need. Everything's internal. This is just going to cost hours. Now, is Duke working on overtime? Let's just say he is. So I might go to Duke and I might say, hey, this is the work I need you to do. I need you to make a training plan. I need you to make a training video. How long do you think that's going to take you? And he might say, I think I can get all that done in 10 hours. Okay? That activity, the total cost of it is just 10 overtime hours. And we'll pick our estimate, whatever you think your overtime hours are, times 10. That activity is going to cost that amount of money. Now you repeat all the way down, activity after activity. You estimate the cost of each activity, and then the total of those is your project budget. So activities plus any expenditures, add those all together, that's your project budget.
And y'all, I know this sounds like a lot, particularly if you're new to project management and leading projects for your department. But first thing I want to say is we're going to talk about this a lot in upcoming episodes, right? We're going to break these things down in detail. We're going to tell you how to get these things done. But I want you to be encouraged and realize that you can do this. You just need to slow down and take a look at it and make it happen. The second thing you can really lean on is that documentation piece, just like everything else in the fire department.
Yeah, that's right.
Nobody really likes documentation, but there's a reason we have it. And in this particular case with project management, it's going to help you later because you can look at those lessons learned at the project closeouts and say, okay, well, how did we estimate the cost of this project? Well, you can take a look at that lesson learned and then extrapolate out what you need to as you're planning this project, and that'll get you started. That'll get your foot in the door.
That's exactly right. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. You can look back on other projects, and that's a great way to help with the estimating. Like, how much did this project, like this piece of work on this project cost? And don't be afraid to reach out to people that ran your previous projects and just ask them, hey man, how did you figure out how much this was going to cost, or how much did this cost? How much work was involved? So yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And yeah, we will talk a lot more about this. We'll do whole episodes on how to estimate time and money. So don't worry if this seems a little complex right now. And just one more thing I'm going to say about that. The goal is not perfection here. The goal is just incremental improvement. Get your projects a little bit better. Start providing good estimates. Don't worry if it's not an absolutely perfect PMI approved project. Just get going. Just get started, and we'll all get better together. So we have a little bit of time left, and I want to talk about. And look, full disclosure is just one of my favorite things. So I'm going to try to find a way to sneak it into every episode if I can. I want to talk about tempo. And this is a good time to discuss it because we're talking about what happens at the beginning of a project. And I just want to emphasize the key to success, or one of the keys to success, is building and keeping momentum. And tempo is critical to that. So just a quick definition for you here, or a quick explanation here. Tempo is the rhythm of your project. We talked about this a little bit on the last episode, but tempo is the rhythm of your project. And it's really important because if you have a fast project or a tight timeline, you're going to need a fast tempo. You got that 60, 90-day project. You're going to want to meet every single week, maybe every single day. But if you get a 2 or a 3-year project and you try to meet every week or every day, you're going to burn your team out. You're going to lose momentum. Maybe you build that momentum, but you're going to lose it. So, and when I say tempo, I mean, how often are you meeting? How often are you as the project manager communicating with your team, with your stakeholders, with your project sponsor, which again, the project sponsor is basically just the person who authorized the work. How often are you giving them updates? And all of this matters because you want to pick, just like I was just saying, you want to pick that right tempo so that your team doesn't get burned out, but you build up enough momentum and velocity to get the work done. So let's dive into that a little bit. Duke, what are your thoughts on picking the right tempo for a project? I know you've had a couple different projects here that you've been working on where tempo really mattered.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I really thought you did a great job in that last episode talking about tempo and introducing it as a concept. And it initially, right away, sprang in my brain, got me thinking about, projects that I've worked on. And 2 of them that have come up a couple of times already is, one was that big pharmacy project that Henrico County did last year. And then the other that I'm currently working on is our cardiac monitor replacement project. And they're 2 very, very different projects. And one of the mistakes that I made as a project manager, particularly in this cardiac monitor project in the kickoff, was establishing too high of a tempo too fast because this project is going to be over 2 years long, established across multiple budget years to make all of this happen. And I can say for sure now, 6 months into it, that I looked at it at the beginning and established much more of a urgent tempo than was needed. That was much more similar to like projects we had done in the past, and that wasn't the case for this. And so I've really had to reestablish my own flow in this project to make sure that we are at the right tempo and not burning people out, because we can't make this project happen overnight. We just have to spread it out and do it the right way.
Yeah, and the reason that we decided to put tempo in this episode, where we're talking about what's happening at the beginning of a project, is all the stuff we just talked about, your scope, your schedule, your budget. This is the time to figure out that tempo. And Duke brings up a great point. You can make adjustments, and I'd encourage you to make adjustments. But this is the time to figure it out. And a couple things to think about. Duke brought up a great point. This is going to stretch across multiple budget years. That's important. So like as you budget this out, as you look at your schedule, think about stuff like that. But also look at how complicated the work is. Is this something that we've, as a department or an organization, is this something we've done before? Doing new things is definitely going to affect your tempo. If you're, and this is something that I've actually struggled with a lot in, my own journey in project management. Doing new things requires a lot more work on your part as a project manager. You're going to have to research stuff. You're going to have members of your team research stuff, and you're going to have to get comfortable stepping out on a limb, going out on a limb and trying new things. Because it's not like you can just look at the last project and say, okay, we'll do it like this one. So that all factors in when you're deciding what tempo that you want to set for your project. And it definitely can be hard in the beginning when you're just getting started managing fire department projects. Figuring out how fast you want to move is tough. And I'll tell you, as firefighters, our default is go, 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 fast, fast, fast. Let's get this thing done. And this is like another big thing is just the mentality of a firefighter is, we get that call, the frap goes off, we get in the engine, we got our gear on, we're going to the fire, we do the work, we're very reactive, and we default to a very fast-paced, aggressive tempo. So just know that all things being equal, you're more than likely going to default to that fast pace. And that's fine for those fast projects, but just like we were talking about, you don't want to burn your people out. So anyways, I don't want to, belabor the point here, but just know that in the beginning of your project, once you get all that stuff figured out, take some time, and this isn't a decision you got to make by yourself. Talk to your project team and just say, hey guys, how often do you think we need to meet? How often do you think I need to be sending out updates to you guys? Talk to your project stakeholder, your project sponsor and your stakeholders for that matter, and just say, look, how often do you need updates on this? How often do you want me to update you on this? So get feedback. Don't make these decisions in a silo. And just remember, build momentum and keep momentum. Tempo is critical for that. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for today. I hope this has been helpful. Just remember, sometimes getting a project started, when you're staring at that blank sheet of paper, that can be the hardest part. But remember, you can send us your questions or any challenges you're having at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. Duke, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Peter. Just remember out there, guys, I know it's tough, but you just got to get started. Keep listening to the podcast and let's learn together.
Thanks for listening to Project Command. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with someone in your department or your next project team. Every share helps more fire service professionals learn the tools and mindset to deliver stronger, smarter projects. And remember, if you have questions, topic ideas, or challenges you'd like us to talk about, email us at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer them either directly or on a future episode. I'm Captain Peter Eunice, joined by Lieutenant Duke Cuneo, and this has been Project Command, bringing command-level thinking to every project in the fire service.